Hey, this is Mike, and thanks for stopping by the podcast. In this episode, I am excited to interview Brad Schoenfeld, who is he's a best-selling author of multiple books. He's been published in every fitness magazine you can imagine. He's appeared in all kinds of TV shows. Probably one of the leading experts, really, in this industry. And he has authored numerous studies. And he's one of the few guys whose work I really follow and whose work I really look up to. Not that I think I'm so amazing or anything. There's just so much bad stuff in this space. You know, I kind of keep a short list of people whose blogs I follow and whose ideas I kind of wholeheartedly agree with. So yeah, I think you're going to like what Brad has to say. He's very educated. He really knows what he's talking about. He has a ton of experience. So let's get to it. All right. Hey, Brad, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike.
Yeah, I'm a fan of your work. Your blog is one of the handful of blogs that I follow regularly and read everything that you put out. And so I am excited to talk to you.
Cool, man.
Yeah. All right. So let's just get right into it. So every day, I spend a fair amount of time answering, people's emails and social media messages and whatever, and field a lot of different kind of questions. And one of the most common frustrations that at least I run into with people emailing me and reaching out to me is just information overload. Because, I guess it's like if you want to, regardless of whether you want to, learn a hobby or get into fitness or whatever, when you first get into pretty much anything, when you start diving into studying it, there's just so much information out there. And at least in the case of health and fitness, there are also just so many opinions on what's the best way to get fit. And so much of that, sounds kind of convincing on the surface. And a lot of different people seem to be well-spoken and seem to be educated and know what they're talking about. In a lot of cases, guys and girls might look the way that other people would want to look. And, it can just be hard to kind of judge the relative importance and seniority of everything,
Yep.
So I thought it'd be a good idea to get from you, just to help clarify for the listeners, what would you say are the fundamental kind of non-negotiable aspects of building muscle and strength and losing fat? Like, what are the bottom line musts and must-nots that no amount of fancy diet schemes or training schemes are going to change?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as far as building muscle, first and foremost is volume. So there is a clear, what's called a dose-response relationship, meaning that when you increase volume, at least up to a certain point, you also see supporting increases in muscle growth and muscle strength. Mm-hmm. So doing a HIIT-style routine where you're doing one set to failure certainly can produce good results, but you're not going to maximize your muscle mass. And this has been demonstrated quite clearly in the literature, as well as anecdotally. And that means that you need to push your volume up to a higher point if you want to maximize gains. Now, the problem is that if you consistently train at high volumes, you will tend to get overtrained. At some point, you're going to get overtrained. And certainly there's what's called a U-shaped curve. So after a certain point, if you do too much volume, it actually ends up falling off. The results, you actually will delve into overtraining and end up falling off. So
like an upside down U?
Correct, exactly, an upside down, an inverted U. So the key here really is to periodize volume, where you have certain periods of training in somewhat lower volumes. Doesn't necessarily have to be one set, but somewhat lower volumes, and then you gradually increase that over time, over a given period of time, whatever that is. Could be a couple of months, 3 months, and then have periods of what are called deloads between that, where you then take small breaks where you're training in a much lower volume and lower intensity fashion to allow rejuvenation. And this kind of wave-like pattern of volume where you're going up and down with volume will ultimately maximize your muscle. And I want to emphasize what we're talking about here is maximizing muscle mass, or what I'm talking about, because gaining muscle is quite easy. Well, up to a certain point. Just, right. If you lift, you lift and you overload your muscles, at least certainly at the initial stages, you're going to gain a lot of muscle. Now, I assume you're talking here about more intermediate to advanced lifters where it starts to get harder, and that's where you really need to start pushing things. Next would be a variety of exercises. I see people, one of the big mistakes I see people who want to maximize muscle is that they do the same lifts over and over again, and same basic lifts. And you have to remember that muscles are compartmentalized, they have different heads, and if you're training with the same movements, you're going to work the muscle in a given way, but you're not going to maximize stimulation of all the fibers. So we know that like an incline press is going to target the clavicular head, while a flat press is going to target the sternal head. The triceps are going to be maximally targeted, the long head with an overhead type movement, whereas the medial and lateral heads with a movement where the elbows are close to the sides. We can go on with this, but
Sure.
varying the movements, and you don't have to get crazy with it. I'm not saying you need to be doing different exercises every day, but there has to be a good variety of movements where you're working the muscles through proper planes of movement and inclines and angles to maximize their development.
Yeah, I've found that having a foundation of the big lifts, like, okay, your pull training is going to be built on something like a deadlift, or your leg training is going to be built on something like a squat, or your chest on something like a press. But then changing, so like certain aspects of the training not changing, and that I'm going to be deadlifting every week, and yeah, sometimes it's going to be heavier than others depending on volume and such, but then though there are aspects of the workout that change every so often to like what you're saying, to put muscles through, to just target them differently. Is that something that makes sense to you, or?
Yeah, there's many different ways you can ultimately, the practical application of it can be done in multiple different ways. So there's not I can give the science of it, the actual art, which you're talking about now, there's not one way I would say it has to be done in this fashion. As long as you're injecting some type of variety in that context, you can keep the structural lifts, your core type movements, which I think is a very good strategy, and then have like some what I call isolation, single joint moves that work the muscles differently. Many different ways to approach that.
Yeah, like assistance work, it might be called in some programs. Yeah.
Yep. And the final thing I'd say is to have train through a spectrum of repetition ranges, loading zones. And I've actually through my lab been doing quite a lot of work on this, with looking at how different rep ranges affect muscle growth. And the working hypothesis that I've come to, and this certainly seems to play out from my experience in working with a lot of high-level physique athletes, is that if you train through, you want to have some heavy loading days, even kind of your powerlifting 3 to 5 rep zones, then your 8 to 12, your basic hypertrophy zone, and then it's actually been surprising to me, but finding that the higher rep ranges really do promote muscle growth, contrary to what has been thought. And the working hypothesis I have now is that it really helps to optimize muscle fiber development across the full spectrum of type 1 and type 2 fibers, where the higher reps, when you're talking your 20, 25 reps, so significantly high repetition training, seems to keep the endurance-oriented type 1 fibers under load for a period of time that will stimulate them to a greater degree than you would with a heavier load. And your heavier loads tend to bring in the type 2, the higher threshold motor units that are associated with the fastest type 2 fibers, and they are not optimally activated, at least through the research I've been doing, through your low load. So it kind of in combination, they have a synergistic effect. So really, that would be kind of my summation of the hypertrophy aspects. So when it comes to fat loss, really that's going to be obviously a function of diet. And I have basically I follow what's called the hierarchy of nutrition, where first and foremost, when you're talking about losing body fat, it's cutting calories. It's watching your energy in versus energy out. So it can be done through doing more exercise, but there's diminishing returns there because you end up getting overtrained. It's going to end up interfering with your strength training and certainly have negative effects. So you need to balance that.
And just to interject real quick, sorry, so a listener can that's something you have to kind of think, you have to kind of learn with your body. Like I know with my body, when I'm in a calorie deficit, I'm usually, when I'm cutting, I'm in a 20-25% deficit. And I can train, I can lift, I can do about 6 hours of exercise a week, basically is what it boils down to. And so I'm doing about 4 hours of lifting, maybe 6.5, 4 to 4.5 hours of lifting a week, and about 2 hours of high intensity cardio, no more than 2 2 hours. And I know that with my body, I can do that, and I can lose fat easily, and I can get lean. But if I start pushing beyond that, I just don't feel good anymore. So, and that's something, I've just, and I'm sure Brad, you've seen the same thing. Some people's bodies are just more resilient than others, it seems like, when it comes to that.
Yeah, well, first of all, you just bring up an excellent point that I was going to mention. That certainly there's a huge inter-individual response, and that goes for both exercise as well as nutrition.
Right.
And you have to know your own body. So when we talk about these things, we talk in generalities. But as you mentioned, some people can train long and hard without ever overtraining, or pretty much never overtraining.
Yeah.
And that's going to, genetics enter into that as well as things like nutrition, whether you're in a deficit or not, sleep patterns, stress patterns. So there's so many lifestyle factors combined with genetics. But the point here that I want to make at the top of this hierarchy is your energy and energy atom. You just hit the nail on the head that it's not, people talk about it's all about hormones or whatever, and that's just silliness. Your hormones could be going whatever. If you're not having if you're in an energy surplus, it's just basic physics that you're not going to lose body fat.
Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, it's I'll get sometimes every now and then I'll get blog comments, 'cause I talk about these things extensively on the website and in different contexts and whatever. But I'll get people that they'll try to say that, oh, that's old, like that's old think. You know what I mean? Now we have all this new research, like. No, metabolic research goes back a century now. Like it's at a point where there's no question. These are laws of thermodynamics. This is not just theories. There's a reason why every single medical weight loss routine involves calorie restriction, calorie deficit. It's just how the body works. There is no question.
Yeah, and it's been demonstrated in metabolic ward studies where it's quite clear that if you're not in an energy deficit, you will not lose weight, and if you are, you will. So the first law of thermodynamics has been convincingly portrayed in the literature.
Yeah.
So again, that is really at the top of the hierarchy. The next would be protein, which hopefully most of your listeners
to jump in on that last point, something that you might have just give the reader before we get on to the next thing. It just occurred to me is that one of the things that I think throws people off a lot with calories in, with energy balance, is that calories in, that's easy to quantify. If you track everything you put in your mouth, then there you go, and we can get very, very accurate on that. But the calories out, the energy expended, can be trickier to determine. Do you want to talk on that for a minute? Just because I think that's where it throws a lot of people off. At least because I'll have people that come to me. I'll have girls come to me. Let's say she's 5'5", 5'6", 130 pounds, eating 1,900 calories a day, wondering why she's not losing weight. And I have to explain, well, that's actually quite a bit of food. Like if you could be in a good deficit at 1,900 calories a day, you'd have to be really physically active.
Well, and your point is extremely well taken. So it's very difficult, if not impossible, if you don't have access to metabolic tools, instrumentation, you're not going to be able to. It's basically just going to be an estimate because, first of all, you can track your calories in pretty well, but even there's some variation there. Calories out, trying to know how much you're actually expending during exercise and physical activity is very difficult. Knowing what your metabolic rate is impossible unless you're going to have it measured. And even more so when you start to go into a deficit, your body is going to do something called adaptive thermogenesis, where your body starts to adapt to the weight loss program and is going to start to fight it by suppressing metabolic rate. So you have to remeasure that again. Yep. And your NEAT, what's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is things like fidgeting and how much you move around just without exercise, that often is suppressed as well, that you become more sluggish and you don't burn calories. So there's a whole very complex aspect to this. So basically you're just left in the normal everyday, I don't want to scare people away on this, but you basically now are left to estimate, and that if it's really an easy thing to do. You weigh yourself. If you see you're not losing weight, you're going to have to either expend more energy or cut more calories, and it just becomes a continual process. It makes it easier if you're in a lab and have access to it. So.
Sure, yeah, and then also just so the listener knows, like again, it's a point of learning your body. I've learned the kind of my, I guess you could say, quote unquote sweet spots for losing fat, for maintaining. It also depends how lean I want to stay, because my maintenance calories are a bit lower if I want to be really lean. But you learn your body, as I know that if I wanted to be in a slight calorie surplus to bulk, as it would be called, I would need to be eating about 3,300 calories a day. And over time I'd probably have to increase that, but that's just given my body composition and my activity level, that's it. And if I want to maintain right now, I kind of maintain around 8% or so. I like to stay lean. So if maintenance for me is probably about 2,800, and if I wanted to get leaner, I'd have to go down to 23, 24. That's where I'd start probably. And so it's part of learning your body. As Brad said, you don't have to think it's too complicated. It's just know that if you're first go at it, if you're first you work it out, maybe using the Catch McCardle or whatever, and you at first you're not seeing the weight loss. It doesn't mean that your body's broken or that it doesn't work with you or whatever. It just means something's off, and you have to relook at what you're actually eating. Are you overdoing it on your quote unquote cheat meals, or are you overestimating expenditure? So it is there is a bit of a learning process, and for some people there's no learning process. Some people, they just go, they go by the estimation in their body, they lose all the fat they want, and good for them, but that's not everybody.
Yeah, and you really hit the nail on the head again. You said it as well as I could have said it, and that it's a matter of experimentation. You got to get to know your body, and once you do, it becomes a lot easier. So the initial phases of getting used to this is difficult, or can be difficult sometimes. So as
right.
you said, some people do nail it, but that's something that with a little practice, pretty much you can know your body after a few months or so, and basically have it down for the rest of your life.
Yeah, totally. So sorry to cut you off. Back on the protein thing. I just thought it'd be a good
the next
thing
thing
to
would
jump
be
in on.
protein. So when we're talking about calories in, calories out, we're just talking about the loss of weight, where we're not looking at body composition, where that weight's coming from. And that's obviously, you can lose weight, but you can be losing a lot of muscle, which often happens depending on the dietary approach. And that's why protein is extremely important, if nothing else, to prevent the loss of muscle while you're in a caloric deficit. Generally, and your protein needs actually go up even more depending upon how large the deficit is. So a good rule of thumb is about 1 gram per pound of body weight. It's a little higher than you probably need, but to me it's a nice buffer to make sure that you're getting in the proper amount of protein. So, and that's
also,
by the way,
protein's satiating. I mean, when you're cutting,
exactly.
it helps you. It helps keep you from getting hungry. So at least you got that as well.
And we're talking your goal body weight, by the way. So if you're currently 50 pounds overweight, if you're 250 and you should be 200, you shouldn't be basing it at 250. You should be basing it at 200.
Right.
So you're really looking at about what your goal body weight, your lean body weight would be there. Then comes the nutritional quality, which is again further down the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. This pyramid, I never would say that some people just dismiss you can eat anything, and I do think there is an importance to quality, and if nothing else, you're getting proper nutrients. If you're going to be sucking down Mountain Dew all day, you're not going to be getting all your important vitamins and fiber and other things that have.
And you're going to be miserable because you're going to have no calories for food.
Yeah, well, and that's true too, and there's hunger issues as well.
Yeah.
The carb to fat ratio would then be underneath that. Where, again, to me, it's way overplayed, the ketogenic diet versus the low-fat diet.
Yeah.
Some people do better on one. Again, this is where inter-individual response comes in. I'm not saying it's not important, but you need to know how your body responds. Some people are a little more insulin insensitive and do better on a higher fat diet, where others do better on a higher carb diet. There's actually been a couple of cool research studies that have looked at this. And that's something that you just got to get used to, and it also has to do with the enjoyment as well. If you're not going to enjoy, if it's completely miserable to be on that diet, you're not going to stick with it, and adherence is obviously paramount, the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people forget that too. I mean, they think that because low carb is kind of trendy these days, and generally, I mean, I'm not a fan unless the person has good reason to do it. I mean, when as you know, when protein is when you're looking at a high protein diet, over time the fat loss is negligible. There's not really different between low carb and high carb. So if you're lifting regularly heavy weights, low carb sucks. I mean, no one has a good heavy weightlifting workout on a low carb diet that I've ever run into. I don't know if you know people that.
No, and I agree. I mean, I think now, well, I think generally speaking, it is a performance detriment to be on a low-carb diet, although I do have a colleague that I'm waiting for the data to come out that he just conducted a study showing pretty much equal results on muscle building on a ketogenic versus a
I've heard it. Yeah,
carb.
actually, I heard it. I think I saw a preview of this.
So yeah, I'm waiting to see the data, and again, I always reserve judgment. I'm always willing to change my opinion, but look, again, it does come down to then you have to say what's more important, the fat loss or the muscle gain, and these are things I can't. It's up to the individual. You have to make your own decisions there. But I just think it's way overblown as far as importance goes.
Right.
I mean, that's more the point here. And the final thing would be the timing of nutrients. I actually just conducted a meta-analysis of eating frequency, how many meals a day you should eat, and the old advice, bodybuilding advice, that you need to really jack up your metabolism by eating 6 times a day. We pretty much refuted that, where there was no difference based on the timing and fat loss. I would say generally you need a minimum of 3 meals a day for anabolism to maximize muscle growth, or to keep your anabolic system revved up to optimize protein synthesis. But other than that, whether you're having 3 meals, 4 meals, 5 meals, really very little of no difference between meal frequency. And even we've kind of debunked, we also had a paper from my lab that came out not too long ago on post-exercise timing of nutrients. And we found that there's not much credence. Certainly it's not going to get the old adage again that you get jacked from taking a protein dose immediately. You have to suck down your protein drink within 20 minutes of your workout, or you're going to go catabolic. Really is quite silly.
Yeah.
And whether if it does have any effects, they would be pretty small, and we're still not even sure they do. So
yeah, that's one of those things. Personally, I just usually have some protein after, just in case.
And I'm the same way, by the way. I will say that I still get when I get home, but
I'm not like racing to get my whey shake down. But I'm going to come to the office and I'm going to make a shake because it's convenient and I want to get to work, and so there we go.
Right. So it's not. So again, what I just said is that, or hopefully, what I'm hoping that it came across, that it's a hierarchy here, and that some people while some people put more credence in others, you have to look at what's important to you and focus. Sometimes people don't see the forest from the trees. They're focusing on their timing or whatever, and they don't focus on the calories, which is the most important.
Right.
You want to focus on your most important things. It's not that the other things have no value at all, but you just need to focus on them less. You have to focus on what's most important for the most part.
Yeah, and these days it's obviously very popular to focus on the nutritional quality, that part of the hierarchy. That's what a lot of the mainstream kind of diet, quote unquote, gurus push these days. Of these are the foods that quote unquote clog your hormones and make you gain fat, and these are the ones, all that stuff. And, and going back to that point, because then on the other hand, we have the if it fits your macros thing that's kind of big in the fitness world specifically, and a lot of guys they look at that as a license, as you were saying, to just eat whatever. They're like, okay, I'm going to have 6 bowls of Apple Jacks, and my carbs are going to be Apple Jacks, Pop-Tarts and
Pop-Tarts, right?
Yeah. So, what's your take on like if because a lot of people are like afraid of certain things, like they are afraid of sugar and they think it's going to make them fat. Obviously, we know that's not true. But in terms of breaking down, let's say, calories from nutritious foods, and that means nutrient dense foods, not necessarily foods that like, okay, whole grains are, demonized by certain diet cults, I guess you could say, and then but whole grains are great sources of certain nutrition. So nutritious foods, how in terms of total daily calorie intake, what would you say is a good breakdown to go, okay, if you get this amount of your calories can come from generally unprocessed nutritious foods that you're going to prepare yourself, and that's where you're going to get a lot of your micronutrients and blah blah blah. And then if you want to throw in some random whatever junk, I mean, I'm not into junk food personally, but my stuff would be more like I like chocolate, or I do a little dessert every day of some kind. What's your take on that? Like, what's a good balance where you get to still enjoy some stuff, but you have an all around healthy diet? You know what I mean?
It's a great question. I defer one of my real good friends and colleagues, Alan Aragon, who actually has a new book out called The Lean Muscle Diet, and he touches on this, and I subscribe fully to his opinion that it's kind of the 80% rule. If you're eating good 80% of the time, that other 20% can be used pretty much as for whatever you want.
Yeah.
And the old if it fits your macros concept was not based on eating Pop-Tarts all day. It's been bastardized for that to kind of come to that, but ultimately it just meant that you didn't have to worry if you wanted to have Pop-Tarts once in a while. And then it kind of got again bastardized to the point where it said, well, you just eat whatever you want as long as you're. Yeah, and you have to remember, there's many, you even touched on it before, there's things like hunger issues. If you're just going to eat Pop-Tarts and Apple Jacks all day, you're going to be chomping at the bit to have more food because it's just not satiating. And of course, the quality, there's protein quality. Now, again, I'm not one to say that you have to have like that protein quality needs to be focused on above all, but there is credence to the fact that certain proteins are higher quality. If you're going to just eat, let's say, a soy protein, you're going to have a lot more of it to compensate for the lack of quality. Yeah. So anyway, there's other issues there that I don't know how much you want to get into them, but really to me the relevance is, and I think the more practical aspect take home for most people that would be listening, is that if you eat well 80% of the time as far as the foods, whole foods, unprocessed, that you can have 20% to do pretty much whatever you want as long as you're staying within your if it fits your macros. And the macros, again, the macros are specific to the individual and also above all the total calories that you should be consuming.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, obviously, it goes back to that top of the pyramid you're talking about, which is the energy balance. It's just tracking macros. Just for the listeners, it's really once you work it out, it's just an easier way. It's less to think about than calories, because if you know, like, okay, I know that if I were going to be cutting right now, I'd probably start with 200 protein, 250 carb, and 50 fat a day. That's probably where I'd start, and that's easy to think with. I can now make a meal plan with that, as opposed to 2,500 calories. It's just tracking macros is just a shortcut. But you got to, of course, the calories in the end. You can track all the numbers you want, but if you're overeating, you're overeating, and that's just it.
And by the way, again, the most important thing to track is your protein intake.
Right.
If you're off on your fat and carbs, for most people, it's just not going to make, within reason, it's not going to make much difference at all.
Right, definitely.
And you want I should mention too, with fats, you need to get your essential fats. It's not the types of fats that you're eating are very important there. You want especially your omega-3s, but both 6 is also important too. So you want to have a complement. Omega-6s are pretty rich in the American diet. Yeah. Many people are deficient in their omega-3s, so it is a very important thing to make sure that you do get at least, say if you're taking a couple fish oil caps a day, then you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not a big fan of fish, so I tend to just supplement, just because, especially the fattier fishes, I don't like how they taste, so I choose to supplement. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a very great. I like the way of thinking of it in terms of a pyramid like that. That's great. So let's move on to the next subject here. And that is quote unquote functional training. Very popular these days. CrossFit's big, and a lot of people are obviously going in that direction. And I'll get people that write me here and there that they're asking about how they can make their workouts more functional, because a lot of the workouts that I'm recommending are built around your basic big compound exercises with some assistance work, and in terms of workouts for advanced lifters, periodization and deloading and so forth. But I know that you have some thoughts on this, on what is quote unquote functional training anyway, and is the traditional bodybuilding approach quote unquote like unfunctional?
Again, this is one of my hobby horses, and it's really a great question. And it is the term functional fitness, by the way, there's no definition for it. If you ask 10 people, they'll have different definitions. And if you want to just talk about it as the ability, which if you're talking about for the general population, which to me is the ability to carry out everyday tasks. Mm-hmm. So the activities of daily living, that to me is functional. A bodybuilding routine, show me a bodybuilder that can't lift packages, pick up a child, go to the train station and
sit down on the toilet and
catch
stand up.
It's just silly that a bodybuilding workout, number one, as you mentioned, virtually all of them will employ squats and rows and all the free weight type moves that would be done in three-dimensional space that would get stabilizer muscles involved. And the thought that like a body, it kind of goes, the thinking is the bodybuilders, they're so muscle bound they can't scratch their head. Well, number one, that comes from taking a lot of anabolic enhancements, for lack of a better term.
Right. And a lot of time and outstanding genetics for it as well.
Well, right. But even without that, they're not going to. So if they can't scratch their head, it's because their biceps are 25 inches. If they were not on what they're on the gear that they're on, they'd be able to scratch their head. So again, it gets a little.
They choose to not scratch their heads. They work hard so they cannot scratch their heads.
It's the bulk getting in the way. It's not the training per se. The average person who's training is not going to get anywhere near that. Yeah. I only wish it was that easy to build that much muscle in a natural state. So again, that doesn't happen. And bodybuilding is a very functional training style if it's done in the way most people do, using a complement of foods. But even if it's not, even if you're just using machines, I harken back. So this kind of depends upon certainly would depend somewhat on the individuals that you're looking at, but the classic study that looked at nursing home patients just using the leg extension. Now, I can't think of any exercise that would have less functional relevance than a leg extension.
Right.
Well, after 8 weeks, a group of nursing home patients, and this study was done back in 1990, 3 days a week, 3 sets per session of leg extensions. After 8 weeks, they improved their functional capacity by 50%, leg strength by 150%, and 2 of the 10 subjects were able to walk without their canes after this 8-week protocol. Now, you tell me what's more functional than being able to walk on your own without assistance. So it's really just silliness that's been taken to an extreme. Now, I also want to point out that if you're an athlete, if you're looking to maximize performance, where the differences between, so the functional transfer there is much more specific, then obviously a bodybuilding routine, the principle of specificity would state that a bodybuilding routine would not optimize that performance. So it really then starts becoming who are you talking about as far as the functional transfer, what are they looking to do? There certainly can be people with certain job tasks that would benefit from certain types of moves put in that are specific to their work environment or things they do, mountain climbing, whatever they might want to do as a hobby. And those are things that would have to be accounted for. But just on a general level, I would challenge anyone to show that a bodybuilding routine is not going to allow them to carry out their everyday tasks in a very efficient manner.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, and I totally agree. And while we're on the subject of functional training, let's quickly talk about CrossFit. What's your take?
Yeah, I again don't have a problem with CrossFit per se, for what it is. If you're looking to be a jack of all trades, it's not going to maximize it. You can't. If you want to maximize something, you have to train specifically for that. So the thought that you're going to maximize hypertrophy and maximize strength and maximize muscular endurance, well, it doesn't happen.
Right. You
can't maximize everything in one type of routine. So it's kind of a jack of all trades routine that I think has relevance for those who want an overall good fitness routine. I think the implementation is not done well in many of the centers. Now, with that said, I don't do CrossFit. I've just have spoken to people and I've tested some people who are CrossFitters, and they often will have strength imbalances because they're not training through a full spectrum of planes with movements in all the planes. There's certainly, from what I've gathered, an increased incidence of injury. Mm-hmm. And does that mean it has to be that way? No, that's just the way that many of these facilities are carrying it out, and that I think a lot of the people who are owning CrossFit boxes are really not fitness people, and they do a two-day course and come out thinking that they're now exercise physiologists, and they really don't have a grasp of how not only to train safely but also to manipulate intensity. We talked about deloading, that it's kind of push yourself without ever coming down, and that's usually a recipe for overtraining and disaster ultimately. So again, can CrossFit be a viable strategy? I think it can if it's carried out properly. So it's really then comes to the implementation, not the concept.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it is so easy, like you said, you take a weekend course, because Olympic lifting is inherently, it's not that it's inherently dangerous, but their injury rates are inherently are higher with Olympic lifting than just a traditional bodybuilding routine, because the movements are trickier, and especially you start adding weight. Even when you know what you're doing, you're increasing the risk of injury. Not that you shouldn't do it, but it's just part of the game. It just comes with it. So, when you have a bunch of people that, especially people that are out of shape and they're new to weightlifting, I don't think starting them out on ramping them up to heavy Olympic lifts is the way to start somebody with weightlifting.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, that even high-level Olympic coaches who have basically gotten master's degrees in exercise physiology, there still is a higher incidence of injury in those in that type of sport than there is in the general resistance training population, just because of the complexity of the moves and the speed of the move that's being carried out, and that's being carried out in people or under the supervision of people who are very experienced. So when you're not so much experience, a 2-day course doesn't exactly qualify for someone who has their master's degree that's gone through 6 years of schooling and understanding biomechanics and XPhys and other things. So, yeah, great point.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, last and not least, kind of a random question, but I get asked it fairly often, so I want to kind of get your take on it.
Sure.
How long can you go without training before you start losing muscle? So let's say you're going to be on, you're out of town, or you get hurt, or for whatever reason, because a lot of people will write me and they'll be paranoid that if they miss a workout for a week, are they going to lose muscle 2 weeks, or they'll come back after a couple of weeks and they're significantly weaker, and then they're freaked out that they lost a bunch of muscle.
Yeah, so there's no, I can't give you an exact point because it will be different for, number one, we talked about before, inter-individual differences, but it's also going to depend upon how long have you been training for, how intensely have you been training, how much muscle do you have. So many things come into this. What I can tell you without question is that, number one, you start losing strength before you lose muscle mass. So strength, actually, the neural aspects deteriorate a little more quickly. A week, you will not lose anything. 2 weeks, you will start to lose some strength, usually a little more than that before muscle starts being lost. But again, it's quite minimal. Significant muscle loss doesn't happen until you've been out certainly over a month, when you'll start to see appreciable, for most people,
Right.
muscle loss.
Right, and then on top, and then if you get back, you have muscle memory on your side, which is very real. So it's like, that's my normal thing. Is like, don't worry, you're gonna miss a couple of weeks. It's not a big deal. You're not gonna lose anything. You're gonna come back a little bit weaker, and if you did lose any muscle because maybe for whatever reason, you're gonna gain it back very, very quickly.
And not only that, some people it depends how hard you've been training, but that can actually foster increased growth. So you might lose a little at the beginning, but not only would you gain it back, some people will then actually be able to go past the plateau they might have hit because they'd been overtrained. I mean, usually the people that are worried about that are the ones that are just pushing balls to the wall every time they're training, and they're the ones who need often that extra deload. So if they take a couple of weeks off, certainly three weeks, it's certainly not going to hurt them and possibly can end up benefiting them down the road.
Yeah, I've had that before. Just like you say, pushing hard to where I just you start your workouts start kind of going to shit and just tired and not having the strength and not wanting to be there, and then take a week or two off and then come back totally refreshed and break through whatever I was stuck with. Okay, awesome. So now let's change gears here real quick and tell me about, you have a book that's been out for a couple years, and I know it's sold well, and I've run across a lot of people that have read it, and so tell us about it.
Yeah, it's called the Max Muscle Plan. It's a 6-month periodized program that takes a person through on a step-by-step basis how to maximize their muscle, and it discusses not only the program itself, but teaches people how to customize it to their own needs and abilities. We talked about that's really important. So it's called the Max Muscle Plan, published by Human Kinetics, and that is out in all major bookstores as well as on Amazon. I also have a popular website called lookgreatnaked.com, where I run a blog and have a free newsletter and give out free advice and free articles, discuss my research a lot, so check that out as well.
Yeah, and I highly recommend you check out Brad's stuff. Like I said, he's one of probably 6 or 7 blogs that I check regularly just because I'm always looking for, just trying to stay on top of the research side of things. And Brad knows a lot more than I do, so I just defer to people smarter than me. And so I recommend that you add his blog to your Feedly or whatever you use. And I haven't read your book, Brad, but like I said, I've seen it on Amazon, and I've had people, I've come across it, so I need to add it
I have to get you a copy. I'll have to let my publisher know, and we'll talk after. But I'll get you out a copy.
Yeah, no problem. I'll buy it because I don't know. I like to do that. So I'm gonna add it to my list. I kind of have my reading list is like on a rotation of, I'll read a health and fitness book, and then I'll read a business type of book, and blah blah blah. So I'm gonna add it to that list.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time, Brad. I really appreciate it. I know we covered a lot of great stuff. I think listeners are gonna appreciate it. And yeah. So thanks again.
My pleasure, bud. Hopefully we talk down the road.
Definitely. Hey, it's Mike again, and I hope you liked the interview. Before I sign off, I just wanted to take a second to basically plug my book launch that I have going. You may have heard about it, but I recently released the revised and expanded second editions of my books, Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, which is for men, and Thinner, Leaner, Stronger, which is for women. And I have a whole giveaway that I'm doing. I'm giving away over $10,000 of stuff, and that's real stuff that has real value, not like $10,000 in shitty PDFs or something like that. Like we actually spent one of the guys that works with me, he spent months contacting companies and gathering up all kinds of stuff. So if you want to check it out, you can get the books and then get all kinds of bonus cool things for buying the books while we're doing this book launch. And then you also entered to win, big prizes or big giveaway packages. You can learn more at muscleforlife.com, just spelled out muscle, F-O-R, life.com /launch. So yeah, check it out. I think you're going to like it.